Your three favorite directors of animation list. Give me
Okay.
reasons.
My favorite is Tex Avery because he's just the master. He couldn't animate. He had one working eye, but he knew comedy and he knew timing and he knew the sense of the ridiculous, which is what I love. Uh, Another one, I won't put them in order because
Okay.
I like them for different reasons. Brad Bird, uh, Iron Giant, and The Incredibles 1 and 2. And it could be just for the Iron Giant because that is such an incredible film, and I love his work. And Miyazaki, because he creates wonderful worlds, and you are absolutely immersed in them. And there is a particular style. Sometimes it is a little bit on the over emotional side, but in terms of creating a creative vision, uh, he is way up there for Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, and all the others of that oeuvre.
And so that really takes us to what we're about to talk about in a way, in a kind of way, which is what is a director? And hello, my name is Dave Osborne, and I've been directing for over 30 years. And I directed Super Team 4 and a show for Lego called Nexo Nights. And I'm also known for directing a number of episodes of Mr. Bean, the animated series. And so, welcome.
And I am Stuart Evans. I've been a director for 27 years, and I have directed CG Bob the Builder and many, many other series. Maybe not quite as high profile as Mr. Osborne, but they're being shown. So that's all good.
Do
And
you know
I, and I
what? That
do I
counts.
do know my job.
But really, today we're talking about what is a director. First of all, let's talk about the titles, because I've been called lots of things and not just director.
Yeah, I think we've all been called lots of things, but officially
officially,
on a contract and,
officially on
and a
the
bunch of credits.
yeah, absolutely. And so I think I quite often these days get called series director, and that's usually when I'm working on a large complex series where there are perhaps more than one directors and they need a lead director, maybe that has to deal with a showrunner or a single important client, or be the interface between multiple facets of the production.
Mhm.
I've also found it's a role that's quite often used in when you're working on a CG series. That's happened to me a number of times
Okay.
because of the pipeline on the CG, where you have to take, it takes a long time to build a set and get it right, that you often have to
Mm.
start that process much earlier in comparison to 2D. So that
Yes, yes.
overview is often it's something I've been involved in a number of times. I've of course been credited as director, and I think there's also other roles where people use the term animation director, and
Mm.
I'm conscious that I often use the term director of animation when I want to separate that title perhaps from somebody who directs live action.
Yes,
I don't know whether
yes.
that's a good thing or a bad thing, but sometimes in that sort of definition you have to do that. Animation director is for me somebody who looks and works at particularly perhaps picking up at layout and in across the animation stage delivering through into color. I
Mm.
mean, maybe your definition might be different, but I think that's kind of roughly what it would be. And the other title I've forgotten is episode director, where again probably working under or with a series director, where somebody takes on picking up from a certain stage, sometimes at animatic, sometimes at layout, and will guide an
Mhm.
episode through, perhaps up to post production stage.
In my experience, I have had the credit of director and also series director, and some projects that are hopefully coming up. They've all been stated as series director because there is a bigger overview with probably an option and necessity for other episodic directors to come in and just sort of help with the general workload. So when a schedule is really, really quite heavy, and it gets very intense. And you have to be, as director, you have to be across multiple things, multiple aspects of the production, and sometimes you have to pass it across. You have to pass it across to a voice director or the animation director a little bit more than you ordinarily would. But in my experience, I have always been the only the only director on the show. So there have been, or the main director, and then below me there has been, I say below, but in conjunction with, there have been specific voice directors and animation directors. But I've always had the general overview. So whether I'm called director or series director really makes no odds to me.
Yeah,
So
I've
that's not
sort of
it's
just
not really a distinction that I've come across.
um, no, I think possibly I on the CG series that I've done, that it's probably been
Mm,
a much more distinctive, defined role because of the nature of the process. On a
yeah.
2D series, if you say, "Oh, look, I want a vista through the window of a built-up futuristic city," without being funny, you can do something graphical quite simply and do that perhaps in an afternoon. Somebody in Illustrator or Photoshop or whatever painting program that you want to use for it. But if you say that to somebody in CG, then that's a lot more planning that has to be done
Yeah, yeah,
around. So I think I've often found that the role for me as series director has been to sort of oversee and look ahead and try and put a lot of the planning in place. Still deeply involved in the script writing side of it. Certainly work with the lead writers and the producer to actually assure that the scripting sort of worked for what we needed it to do,
yes,
and
yeah,
also probably leading on the audio phases, either working with a voice director at that stage, in the casting, and also being involved in probably the sound design and leading that process, maybe deciding what the sound design should be for the overall feel for the series. But again, there might be on occasions episode directors who would then take that process on as well once it's all been decided and concluded. I mean, that was often when there was perhaps certainly in one experience with a large commercial client behind us who had very specific needs and conditions and terms, and wanted to be able to speak to one person across a multi-platform production that involved episodes, webisodes, interstitial materials, and multiple sort of
yeah. So that's a lot more prevalent nowadays because everyone's looking for a spin-off, or what are the extra aspects that we can bring to a series. It's no longer just, well, we'll show the series. It's, yeah, across all the media.
I think in the end, I think the role is similar, and it doesn't really matter. It just you're through various forms of communication, you're having to sort of give out more of the responsibility and perhaps more of the um, process of some of those decisions, some of the sort of finer decisions. Um, but you still got to take it through and lead it tonally, and probably ensure that there's a consistent voice across it all, which is a big part of what the director has to do. Well, that's what that person does. Without that voice looking from the script to the board to the layout to the animation to
Mm,
the post side of it, there's somebody who's carrying all the information that takes all of those pieces and keeps it in a line to where it should be.
yeah,
um,
keeps all the
uh,
tone
keeps
correct.
the
And
keeps the tone, maybe having to deal from multiple voices in terms of producers, executives, and other shareholders, if it's a commercial operation. Um, and without that, then obviously the voice is at each stage, and that's a little bit like, without that little game that used to play in the class where somebody would sit in the corner and whisper in somebody's ear, and it would go around the class until it came back to
mm,
you 5 minutes later, and whatever that phrase was that you started off with has completely changed. It's sort of
yeah, yeah,
it's that sort of game that we used to play as a kid.
Which brings us to, I mean, you've covered a lot of this. What are the most important attributes, multiple, you need as a director? And you've already covered quite a few with the many tasks that we need.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think what in those terms, what do you think? What do you think are the important values? What is it you as a director have brought to the productions that you feel have been important?
I think the main attribute, well, one of the main attributes, they're all so important, is that I feel, and this is something we'll touch on later, that the role of director in a production has changed. So when I was learning my craft, as it were, at the feet of some West End giants who we've both worked with, who I see as very much mentors. It was nothing official, but learning from them and seeing how they conducted their business and what they brought to a show. For me, being a director is that you have that initial vision, that you keep everything in your head, and what you see initially is the direction of the entire show, and you have to bring everyone into line and have that direction. And it can slightly widen because you get those influences, but for me, that's my main job, is to make sure that we have that continuity, we have the theme and the tone and the feel, the pace, the humor, the intensity. Everything has to be there, and I have to maintain that. And it's my responsibility to make sure everybody is singing the same song. And the song that I have in my head at the start is pretty close to the one that turns out at the end. And yeah, if it's in tune, great, that's lovely. There might be a few discordant voices on the way, but we will get there. And that is my main job, is to do that. To also to acknowledge that everyone has their role. Everyone's role in the process is important, and as a director, you should take responsibility. Always, the responsibility ultimately is yours. And I've done that in the past, like to say, okay, well, it's down to me. It was my call. It's down to me. And you talk to your team and you bring everyone together and you make sure that everyone has their responsibility, and to know that you allow everyone in your team to do their best, and to know that they have the space to add to a project, and to give them the room to express their creativity, and to give them all the space that they need, but still say, yeah, you can do what you want and be fantastically creative, but you have to still keep on track. And it's my job to say, yeah, that's fantastic, that's not going to work, but let's tweak it and let's bring it back on track. So it's being understanding of everyone's strengths and sometimes weaknesses and working on those, but playing to everyone's strengths, recognizing that, bringing everyone together, being being as tactful as possible with problems that come up, having the strength of your vision, to keep that vision in your head when you are discussing it with executives or all the other stakeholders, and say, okay, I have to convince you that this is going to work. And I've had this. I remember being spoken to by an executive when we got to the end of a feature, and they said, you know what, you were right. I said, well, thank you. And we'd had multiple problems all the way through the production. And I said, you have to trust me on this, because it won't be clear all the way through, but believe me, I'm carrying it through in my head. the visuals, the sound, the music, everything will come together and it will work. But you have to trust me. And again, it's that responsibility that you're carrying on your shoulders. But it's fun to do that. It's fun to bring everyone along for the ride and to work as a team, to be able to manage a team, to be personable, to be a decent person, to treat people well. Because if you treat people well, as well as being the right thing to do, you'll get the most out of people. So it's being a people person, if you will, but also having to be a negotiator, having to speak management speak, and also speak to the artists on the level that they understand. I feel it's essential to have the knowledge of each of the processes, at least the working knowledge. Doesn't have to be massively in depth, but you have to recognize the role of all these departments in it, and you have to be able to give creative notes and give suggestions and always be positive. Never just be negative and say this won't work. You have to say this won't work because, and here's a solution. You are the one who has to solve the problems. It's on you.
I like the idea, and I totally agree. You want to give people space to play in and find things within the story or the characters, whether that's within storyboard, with layout, animation, voice. You want to find things that are perhaps slightly below the surface in terms of the script or your thinking. At the same point, yes, you have to sort of control it and think, okay, whilst that might seem fun at this precise moment, I know that ultimately it doesn't really fit with the other components that I have to put around it. I mean,
Yeah.
I think for me, one of the things that I realized, and I didn't really realize this at the very beginning, um, I can certainly see how decisions will look further down the line. So, in other words, if somebody says, well, we could do this, in my head, I can look at that decision and go, well, if we do this, do this, and do this, and do this, and do this. And for me, it's like walking. I describe it as sort of going through a tree where you're going one branch, crossing across to another and up, across to another one and up, and eventually you get to the light at the top. But I can see it all the way through to the light, and I can and I don't know where this came from, but for me, I always had that ability to be able to do it, and I think it was one of the reasons why people picked up on me and gave me the opportunity to direct, because they realized that I could see ahead beyond where we were at this particular moment.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a series of logic and everything around it, and I can certainly do that in an edit. I can look at a decision that we're making now and think about it and think, okay, if we put this shot here, this will have this effect and this effect, and it will mean this later on in the episode. I'll have to do that with the
Yeah.
sound. I'll have to add the music here. Da, da, da. I can think it through, that decision. And equally, I can look at an edit and recut it in my head and then tell it back what it's going to do before the editor's done it as well. That's something else I've realized I could do. I didn't know anybody else could do it, or whether nobody could do it. I just realized that was something I was able to do. So I think for me, directing has always been this ability to, like you describe, looking over the horizon at times, to try and ensure that where the decisions that you're making now are still going to arrive and take you to the destination. You want the destination to look fabulous and be brilliant. But, along that way, you've got to make sure that you are going in the right direction towards it. So, yeah, I think that's a big part of what it is. I think the ability to communicate to people, I think, is incredibly important. And as you describe, you know, doing it with a tone that shows care, understanding, also just trying to understand where that particular artist or person is, both in terms of their skill, talent, and ultimately even their mentally where they are at that particular point in their lives or whatever,
Mm.
so that you can hopefully get the best out of them and get them
Yeah.
to produce the best work that you possibly can and feel good about it as well. you know
Yeah.
um I think that's quite an important thing, especially when you
Mm.
work on something that may take 2 years, 3 years. It's a long haul. It's not like you're putting up a set of shelves. You go, oh, I'm not going to wear it. It's done. It's up. It took me the afternoon. You start on a project, making a film or a series. It will be with you for a number of years.
Yeah, and you're working very closely with everyone. We've said it before, and everyone in the industry will recognize this, that there's that intensity of a relationship between everyone who work, and you have that shared experience because you were all living this at the time, and it's like a campaign. And you should always get a little campaign medal at the end of it. And you said, I survived this series. And you always get to the end of it, you go, oh my, do you remember that show? Wow. But when you're in it, it is a shared experience, and making sure that everyone's experience is a good one. Sometimes it's leading by example, and you have to say, right, okay, I'm not expecting you to do more than I would do myself. I've worked on a show where there was six of us in a small studio, and they said everyone was getting ready to, literally got their coats and their bags on. They said, we're off. And I said, what are you doing? I said, well, I have to stay here, and I've got to cut this and do these things. And I said, well, that doesn't seem fair. I said, well, no, it's fine. You go. And they went, and such was the team spirit, which I was so pleased with, that they said, you know what, we'll stay too. And I said, no, please, you don't have to. And I said, no, if you're doing it, then we want to do it. We are happy to stay here. And they stayed, and we said, right, okay, we get some pizza, we have our dinner, and we carry on. And there was that spirit, that team spirit. That's the thing that we've talked about previously, is building a team and maintaining that team spirit throughout the project is such an important thing for me. And to know that if you have artists and whoever is working on your production, if they are not necessarily happy all the time, so that'd be crazy, but if they're happy, but if they're content and they feel stable and they feel heard, they feel that their voice is actually going to be heard, that their opinion on what they do is acknowledged and listened to, and they can have a problem and they will be heard. And I think that is so important. In you get a better result if people are feeling better about themselves working on the project, then you will get a better result. Happy people make for a happy and successful show, and people are content with giving their best, knowing that they are that will be acknowledged. It may not make the final cut, but you're clear with them and say, yeah, I did love that, but for time purposes, I'm going to have to take a minute out of that. I'm really sorry. I know you've put work in, but the cut just didn't work. And they go, oh, okay, fine. And you just acknowledge everyone's part, and yeah, you just go with it. It's a team effort. If we could do it all ourselves, we would.
Do you feel it's important to have had some personal experience in at least some of the various areas of the process?
I have,
as a director,
I have found, as a director, I have found that it's very, my personal journey has been right from in-betweener in the old days of, I've got a peg bar here somewhere, in the old days of the dinosaur, where we were drawing with pencil on paper, and I was in-betweening, and then I was painting, and then layout, storyboard, animation, all the way through. So I feel like I've learned my craft on the way through. So I've sort of built up to being, for me, when I first came into the industry, directors were gods. And I thought, wow, if I could just get to be there and get to be a director, wow, I would be so happy. I am happy, but I'm miserable anyway. But that was my ultimate aim. So I worked through all the many of the various processes, and I feel that as a director, to be able to speak with a certain amount of authority because you recognize the amount of work and the time, mostly the time that goes into the various processes. Like I can recognize how long animation takes and what processes and what the theory behind it. So even though I haven't animated in any of the CG programs or any of the 2D programs, my last animation was in the year 2000 with a Sharpie on a piece of paper. But the theory behind that, the weight, the timing, the posture, the silhouettes, everything, all of that, it carries on through. So I can advise from a point of knowledge, and likewise with storyboard, and I can brief with the knowledge that I have that experience and I understand what each of the processes takes. So I feel that is useful. It's not to say that you can just go straight into director, but I feel it's useful to have an understanding. You can learn that understanding, learn the processes from a director's process, from a director's position rather. But for me personally, I feel that having had all those different roles through the process that led me to be eventually a director have been very useful. And how about you? Your journey there?
Okay. Well, I think one observation that you make there is at the very beginning of that is talking about the ideas of actually observing somebody who is a director, being on the floor when they're working, when they're talking to people, and the things that they get concerned about and the things that they discuss with the animators or layout. I think that's actually being involved on the sort of production side of it. To see that, I think, is very good. I think that's one thing. Observation is a brilliant way of learning, and you need to be there. That means you need to be doing something on the production floor in some shape and form at some point. That's much more difficult these days in this remote world that we live in, and the fact that so much of what we do is done through video calls and paper feedback and tools like ShotGrid or Frame.io. So a lot of it feels these days is a little bit more distracting. I think it's one of the reasons we talked about wanting to do this podcast. Actually bringing it back to what it is that we do as creative people within animation. I do agree. I mean, I started off. I did. I went to West Surrey College of Art and Design, where I did the animation course. So I made films there. I made a film on my own, as you do in the third year. I ended up getting a role as an animator on a very simple television series, relatively simple television series. When I look back now, it was very complicated, but it felt like it when I was doing it when I started out. But it actually, I got, that was my experience. But then I also I did some layout. I did, and that was traditional drawn layout. I did model sheets. I worked on model sheets for a while on different shows when we were doing development. Quite often you were sort of having to do that phase of it and make the model sheets. And yeah, I worked with the editors, and I sort of did all sorts of roles within that phase until somehow I was doing it all in terms of being the director when somebody gave me the opportunity. From that perspective, I think, yeah, I'm there were opportunities, but equally you had to be in the right place, and you also had to perceive it and take the opportunity as well, and do something. It wasn't handed to me. There was a lot of work in the evenings, and there was a lot of drawings that were done, a lot of planning, a lot of thinking, a lot of conversations that were all done that nobody ever got paid for, but it eventually turned into something that was a film, and then turned into something that became my career as a director. A number of years ago, that I was getting more and more involved in script writing, and not necessarily writing, but actually having to read, give notes and feedback, and also understand story structure at that stage of production, and understand how the writers were approaching it. So I did do a lot of self-educating. I read a lot of books on script writing, and then I wrote scripts and I made myself get my head around it. And I've done that a number of occasions with lots of other parts of the process. Where I felt, hang on, I could do with a better understanding. I've I've made myself step out of the circle and go and have a look at something and learn something and take that on board. I did that when I first did 3D. I taught myself 3D Max at that particular point so I could understand the basics. Um, so yeah, I think you have to engage in the process itself. I think to be able to understand it from both what you're asking other people to do, and also the decisions where you can make them. I think that's really important. Because you can make decisions at storyboard, and you can make some other decisions at post production, and still kind of end up with the same result or the same thinking. So it's there are things, if you understand what you're doing and understanding that pipeline, you can make it work for you as a director.
Yeah, it's. I think with this question, difference between us is that I didn't go to film school. I went to art college, and I sort of fell into animation by accident. I didn't realize it was a career, and then fell into it and went, oh, here I am. This is perfect. And then because I wasn't one to I didn't make films when I was growing up or much younger or at college, and then I just learned the craft. So I thought, okay, well, I've got to do this, and it was the fact that as I was going through, and I thought at each stage, like at layout, I was thinking, but I'd like to challenge myself and do those boards. So I learned how to do storyboards. And then I was thinking, but I want to make it move. So I practiced to be an animator. I got to be an animator. And then it was, I'd like to be a director because I wasn't happy with that shot. I'm still learning. I'll never stop learning about all the processes that go on. You have to know what is possible with all the drawbacks of like working in in 2D or 3D. You have to know what is possible. Occasionally you'll say, right, okay, I want this rig to be able to do this. Can you do that? We'll have to break it. Okay, we'll break it. And you learn the boundaries of what you can actually do and whether they meet your expectation of your final vision or the final picture. And you say, but I need it to do that. So how close can you get it to where I need it? Can you go up to here? And most times people will be hopefully inspired to say, you know what, that's a good challenge. I'm going to take that. And you're challenging people to push it all the time. But yeah, I completely agree with just learning as you go, and you never stop learning and learning technique about being directors, picking out shots, seeing fantastic shots and saying, now that's a great shot. I wish I thought of that. I may pay homage to that in my next production and nick it and use that. But it works. It works, and you learn at the feet of the masters.
Did somebody just come along and say, here you go, Stuart, can you direct this? Or did you go, come on, please give me into it? Which way did it come from?
It was it was purely by chance. It was because I was thinking, yeah, I'd love to direct. That's my dream. But it was an acquaintance in the industry, let's say, who said, okay, we've got a Saturday morning thing. It's like 3 minutes every Saturday, and it's topical. It's literally two guys in the stands talking about that week's football and being funny about it. We will write the script on Monday, and by Friday night, you have to have that ready. So what do you think? So I was animating, but I was also directing. So that was my crossover chance. I said, okay, but I'm picking the shots and I'm putting the expressions in. So I was animating, but I was arranging it and saying when we're and doing the timing, the cutting, and everything. So that was my first dip into the water, and it was on a very sort of, it was a crossover, like a 50-50. And then, but then after that, it just sort of disappeared and went away. And then someone gave me a chance, an exec producer for whom I was doing storyboards at the time, clearly thought that I was capable of actually directing, and recommended me to a studio, a well-known studio in the north of England. And after that, I was away, because after that I had a credit. I built up a certain amount of knowledge from that, and then I could say, okay, I've directed this. I've got experience. I trusted myself. I had faith in myself to be able to fulfill that role. I needed to have that chance, and to know I could actually do it, because I could have crashed and burned.
I mean, I was given an opportunity. I was working on a feature film as an animator, and they were coming to the end, but they wanted to keep people on because they wanted to do another one. And myself and somebody else thought, oh, there's an opportunity here. They'll want them to do something. They want to keep some of this core crew doing something. And there didn't seem to be anything on the table. And we literally went in there with a written idea, and the executive picked it up, said, yeah, okay, let's do this. Okay. and we went off, and yeah, it was a bit of a kind of, yeah, I mean, in real terms, it shouldn't have happened. But there's a lot of things like that when you look back, you think, oh, that shouldn't really happened. And that process of boarding and directing and working with people and working with some big names in terms of voices, it was a fantastic experience. My goodness me, now if I had that opportunity again, I would probably do it in so many different ways. But at that point, I knew nothing. I'd always had, like I said previously, I'd always had a good logical brain that could actually look at decision making and think ahead. And probably that helped me draw. I'd also been making films since I was 13. I bought a Super 8 camera when I was 13 and started making films, and had a little light box and shot things and things. So I'd always been in, I'd always wanted to make things, and always, both the physical side of actually doing it, and also, the thinking process that goes with it in terms of creating an idea and making a story and characters. So I'd always had that, those attributes, I think, there. And it was always something I wanted to do. A bit like you, I never really necessarily thought, oh, this is, this is what I'm going to be. I was just happy to be in animation. And then once it got going, oh, I can do this, and other people think I can do it. I was then given an opportunity in a company making television series. I'd worked sort of as an animation director within the company, and an assistant director to somebody, and then they said, well, do you want to do this series? It was a small series, and of course I said yes, and it was a great opportunity. And from that point onwards, I never really looked back in lots of ways. And I've always just thought, well, I'll have a go. I could see things were changing, and 2D was probably not going to be such a big part of the mix as we went forward. This is at the end of the 90s. Toy Story had been, and everybody had gone mad about Toy Story. So, I got an opportunity to direct on a CG series, because there wasn't anybody to direct a television series in CG at that point. Nobody really knew how to do it. But I did know how to kind of direct, and that was another opportunity. And I learned a lot there doing that show, and yeah, it just kept building.
But also with the development, how long we've both been doing this, do you feel that directing is easier now with all the technological aspects to it, and you say your shot grid, apart from the media, apart from 2D and CG, do you feel that it is easier to direct now or when you started?
In a strange way, it's less destructive now than it was when I started. When I started in 1987, we were still shooting on film. and you still edited on a Steam Deck. Everything was a physical process that you had to do with your hands and your eyes, whether it was putting the actual shots together, whether it was drawing, literally everything involved a physicality about it in a way which I think the production process now doesn't have quite the same. Yes, you edit, and yes, you work on a computer, but to a certain extent, the physicality of that element is not a million miles away from what somebody else is doing when they're prepping the backgrounds or writing the Excel. I know this. Does that make sense? It's that each part of the process was quite different then. It had a very separate sort of feel to it and a very separate sort of set of mechanics to it that allowed you to do it. And so the skill set, I think, was quite, each bit was quite different. I think now these days, it's far easier for somebody like ourselves to jump on, a storyboard program, or jump into Premiere, into an edit program, or to, go on to another piece of software that then produces the image or produces the next stage that you need. Whereas I think in the previous time, if you got so far with something, it didn't work, you had to go back further, and it often involved a lot more steps to actually sort of undo and go back. If you saw in color, the shot, and you thought, oh my goodness, the timing on this animation doesn't work, it really meant you had to go, you had to go back pre-camera, even if you could get away with just retiming the cells, or if you then, okay, we have to redraw this little section, it then had to be traced and painted again. It then had to go back to camera, without being too disingenuous to people working on things like, the 2D platforms now that we have, like Harmony or Cell Action, or, you can go into those and make adjustments in a far easier way now than you could possibly do that. Having said all of that, having built up this picture that in the old days it was so much harder, and we're also now expected to produce things quicker and at a higher standard. And I think if I look at what we were making and our perhaps targets in the late 80s, even on higher end productions, and I look at what we do now and what the expectations are now, it's a million miles away. We make things and we do things now that you would have never tried to do, 35 plus years ago. It just wouldn't have worked. Working on, the Super Team Porsche, we did handheld cameras at times within some of the action sequences, that had to look like it was a steady cam moving around and adjusting itself. I mean, you just would never have, you could never do anything like that. Not even that the visual language was there then, to be fair, but you would never have been able to do anything like that.
Yeah, and not without a rostrum camera that's like 12 feet high and weighs 2 tons. You're not going to be able to move around. But there's also the with that, there is also the as you say, the physicality of that time, and the fact that if there was a decision and it was made and it didn't work, you would have to go all the way back. So there was, I feel there was more weight on the decisions of a director at that time. And so you have to get it right. Otherwise, it's going to cost us another 10,000 down the line, because we've got to go all the way back. But now we do have the option of variety and the endless tweaking, because you can tweak it and it doesn't involve that cost and that time delay. This leads me on to the other question, the next one, which is, I feel that in recent years, the role of a director because the responsibility has been maybe slightly lessened, because we can make these changes. I feel that the the role of director and the responsibility that we take has been slightly lessened, because I said, but we can make that decision because I know how to work this program and I can call that and I can make these calls. And I feel that our role as a director has been diminished, would you say, within productions and with studios. That's what I've found and heard from experience, that there are, let's say, they're described as producer-led studios, which I first encountered in the early 2000s, and I didn't understand, because my experience had been in the studios where the director was moving around, and what they said, that was it. That was how things were going to be. So there were a lot more voices. So what's your take on this?
Yes, I think there have been situations where productions have been more producer-led than perhaps director-led. I've been involved in circumstances where I would say that's the case. I've also been in situations where it's been predominantly very much director-led, and certainly what I've tried to do as a director is, there are always, as the phrase, stakeholders, and there are people that have a view and a say, and you have to navigate that, and make it work for both the production, both for the to a certain extent the budget, and also probably for the storytelling.
Yeah.
Although I think there's always been issues around budget and time. I think that's the nature of film.
Yeah.
That's the nature of filmmaking. I've had it, to be fair, I've had it both ways, where everything's on my shoulders, and I've had it also where perhaps the weight of it's been distributed across both producer and director to a certain extent. It probably depends a little bit on the scale and the company, and who their stakeholders are as well. In that sense, I think that's part of it. I do think the role of director, though, from our, is still a vital role. I still think you need somebody to sit across and to see, what it is that we're trying to do in the script, and see how that turns out all the way through into post-production and onto the final version of the film. You do need that continuity across it all. Otherwise it is a series of little multiple kingdoms, each on their own, each going off in their own slight direction. Now, it might still end up being filmic and being narrative based, but I'm not sure it necessarily has a voice in that way that you would that the audience would pick up on and understand the story and the perspective and all the things that I hope a director brings to the process.
But also saying about producer-led, if you work in conjunction with a really good producer, that they have ideas, they are creative themselves, but you each have your own role. And I will say, okay, I'm going to give that to you. Can I do this? And they say, budget won't allow that. Okay, right, I'll change that. But to work closely with a producer is a real joy, an absolute joy. So, but it can be an awful experience if you really don't gel. But if you see things the same way, then it's absolutely essential, because we do need producers to tell us how much money we've got left and how much time we have left. We need those parameters. Otherwise, we'd just be making things for literally years. We do need the boundaries, and that's part of the challenge.
I mean,
set those boundaries.
The famous one is really, I suppose, Richard Williams and The Thief Who Never Gave Up. To a certain extent, the boundaries. Yeah. I agree. I think you do need that discipline and boundaries set, and to a certain extent, that is partly the job of the producer, I think, to do that, along with the production team to do that. I've never felt it's a problem. Yes, you bounce up against the budget sometimes, and somebody says, no, you can't do that anymore, or
Yeah.
you can't have any more of those type of shots because they're too expensive. And sometimes I've had to turn around to people and said, look, I don't think it's a good idea for us to do that. It's going to be, it's not an easy thing to do, and there's going to be a lot of visual effects, and we will find ourselves spending our time and money on the visual effects, which will not aid and tell the story or the characterization any better. So, but that's possibly because I've been around so long that I've seen the mistakes made so many times, and made them. I've made them myself. So, and you try and form a partnership with the producer, and you try and find where you have common ground and where you should probably keep away from each other in that sense, actually sort of keeping some separation so that you can both do your job with integrity and honesty, which, it needs to be done. I think there are definitely differences between now and then, if that sense, having been at this a very long time, I agree an aspect which is your perception is that the role of producer has probably changed. I think that's true. I think there's a lot more people that I would describe as being creative producers, whereas producer probably was just the person that organized the money when I started out, was very much focused on that side of it. I think the technical side of it has probably changed the job and the perception quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's the main thing. I think time as well. I think we're all working under much faster schedules these days. It seems to be that the expectation is that you can do these quicker, and that's being delivered by the tools that we're being asked to use, like the production tools, like the frame IOs and the shot grids, and other software packages in terms of the visual side of it, all kind of give time value to the production where they can use that. I mean, to me, one of the most important things, I would always argue for, please just give me the thinking time. I need the time to look at something and think about it. Where you have this thing where you go, okay, you're going to finish cutting it on at 12 o'clock on Tuesday, and then at 1 o'clock it's going to be reviewed. And you go, hang on a minute, can we not just have half an hour, a couple of hours, half a day, whatever it is, just to look at it and think about it and just make sure that everything is sat there, because you're under this pressure to make decisions constantly. And so, yeah, I think that's probably another aspect which I think is different now. I think there's less thinking time allowed for. You have.
Yeah.
I spend a lot, being frank about it, I spend a lot more on my own time. In other words, once everybody's gone home, I then start thinking about that edit or that particular script and revisit it in my own time, because that's the only time I get to actually look at it and go, okay, and now I understand why this isn't working.
Yeah. It's but then you so often sort of carry it with you. You can't switch off when you're in the middle of production, and if you're working away, you're mulling everything over in your head when you're on the train or before you go to sleep or anything. It's there. It lives with you. You have to keep it going right from the start of production all the way to the end. You never lose it, and your decisions that you make will be for that. But because there are so many decisions, you're just buzzing all the time. But there is that with the time question, that I find that a challenge, and that has been a challenge that I've enjoyed, because you say, okay, you've got this long to do, you've got this long to write it, and at times you say, can I have another day? And they say, yeah, okay, one more day. But it's another discipline. It's another thing to learn. It's like going from commercials to features, and commercial you've got to get done within 2 weeks, and the feature you've got 2.5 years. So it's a different mindset, and if you can, it's like with all the artistic and creative sides of what we do, if you have that ability to adapt to whatever project that you have. That's one of the main things that a director has to have: adaptability, to be able to take on a project and say, whether it's a comedy or a horror, whether it's fast paced, whether it's 30 seconds, whether it's 2 hours, you adapt, and you take on the story and you bring your skills.
I think that's a really good place for us to put the pin in and say cut. And
I've wrapped it up.
Nice to talk to you, and see you again soon.
Oh, hey, don't forget to like and subscribe, do all that pressing and bells and stuff like that. But I will see you next time.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
As always, take care. Bye.
Well, we're hoping that you're enjoying these podcasts, and we would really like to hear if you've got any feedback or thoughts. Perhaps you might even have a suggestion of what we should talk about next time. Thank you again for listening to the very end of the show. And as always, remember, you're not saving lives. It's only a cartoon.